So hi there website members and newsletter subscribers. This is going to be your solar eclipse forecast for the upcoming Cancer Solar Eclipse that happens at the new moon on the 21st of June 2020. So this forecast is going to look at the main themes that will be activated over the next 6 months, with a particular focus on the sun and the moon. And then we're also going to look at some starseed alignments and activations that will be happening, particularly around the Sirian star system and Mercury, because Mercury and the sun will be kind of activating those. I also suggest that you watch these forecasts in sort of conjunction with my geomancy forecasts on YouTube, because the two dovetail together quite nicely. The astrology forecasts kind of give you the celestial overview, the sort of the overriding patterns and themes, but the geomancy forecasts help to kind of ground that in everyday practical 3D reality. So they tend to be a little bit more detailed. So go and check this out if you haven't already, and let me know how you find them. But without any further delay, let's get into this forecast and find out what's happening. What can we say about this particular eclipse? Well, it happens the day after the solstice and in 0 degrees of Cancer. So this is cardinal water energy. And in many ways, this is yin energy, but it's quite strong yin energy. So it's very much associated both with the divine feminine, so kind of queen energy, or empress energy, but also a mother goddess energy. So we could say that this is about womb wisdom. It's the energy of fertility, it's the energy of abundance, it's the energy of birth, creation, nurturing, family, and so on. But as we know from the tarot, the Queen of Cups is really good at emotional balance, and I think that what this is going to do is set into motion a 6-month cycle where we kind of recover our equilibrium after the first, the sort of the shock of the first half of the year. And this is going to be through self-love and self-care predominantly. It could also be caring and nurturing others, but I think that the predominant energy is going to be maternal. So, you know, if you have children, then naturally this energy is going to be important, but I think overall it's more about kind of parenting your inner child, but not from the perspective of the sort of the patriarch, from the sort of protector, but more from the kind of maternal energy of nurturing and bringing out the playful side and the sort of drawing out your inner child in the sense of the more emotional, intuitive, softer side, also the more creative side. So that's something to bear in mind. Key planets that will be active will be Mercury, which will be making a conjunction both to Cerise and Canopus. So these are two fixed stars that are going to be important. I'm going to get into that a little bit more when I talk about starseed activations. Saturn will also be back at 0 degrees of Aquarius, because of course Saturn is retrograde at the moment. So there may well be ties between what happens at this eclipse and the March equinox, when Saturn transitions for the first time into Aquarius. And again, this will happen when Saturn returns to Aquarius again in December. So it'll go over this 0 point of Aquarius around about December again. So you may want to just bear that in mind. And then Mars will also be quite active. It'll be making a T-squared to the nodal axis, and it will be sextiling Jupiter. So I think that what we're going to see is a continuation of the themes that were begun at the Sagittarius full moon eclipse that happened, the lunar eclipse that happened before the solar eclipse. And I think, what we're going to see is, because it's making so many contacts to the outer planets, including Jupiter, Saturn, and Pluto, I think we're going to see a transmutation of the T-square that was active at the lunar eclipse, which was kind of about this kind of spraying or the scattered kind of energy of aggression that wasn't really particularly well thought through, focused, and was sort of a little bit uncontained, to something that's perhaps a little bit more effective in terms of activism and making changes happen. So this is going to relate to the 444 gateway that we had back in April, which was very much Mars season. because we're going to be having, so just before this eclipse, we're going to be having Mars making a sextile to Jupiter, and then just after this eclipse, on around about the 30th of June, we're going to have, no, the 28th of June, we're going to have Mars sextile Saturn. So, you know, as I say, this is going to be much more stable energy, much more expansive, and I think it's going to sort of allow, because of the contacts to the nodes, there's a chance to clear collective karma when it comes to, you know, war, warrior archetypes, all that kind of thing. Because of course, at the last eclipse, we had the Orion gateway, which is all about kind of warrior energy and that sort of the dualism of separation. So I think that this is going to give us a chance to sort of, you know, maybe clear some of that energy on a collective level and move into a more constructive place when it comes to assertion and, you know, making changes. And then on the relationship side, Venus will still be retrograde for another week or so. And interestingly, it'll be during the time period when Venus and Mercury will both be retrograde. So it's this kind of crossover period between these two planets, the personal planets. So Venus is going to be close to a trine to Saturn, and I think what this is going to do is allow for us to have reconnections with potential people from our past, but in a way that is stable. So it's not going to be that earlier Venus retrograde energy that was a little bit unstable, particularly around the, you know, the squares to Neptune. So this is going to allow for more balanced and kind of sensible connection with other people, or maybe a more stable and sensible view of past situations. So one of the key issues I think here is going to be self-care versus codependency, and I think that we're going to be able to resolve that in quite a healthy way. You know, particularly as Venus is coming to the end of her retrograde, which will be 25th, it'll turn direct. So I think this is kind of the tail end of the retrograde, where we're starting to learn lessons and realize what we want to do, having looked back at the past. We're now kind of ready to make decisions moving forward. So that's my kind of overview. Let's take a look at the Sabian symbol next. This June solstice moon occurs in the first degree of Cancer, so you could say in a way that this is the 0 point for the solstice. And it's, you know, if we think about sort of ancient astral law, particularly from the point of view of where the ancient Greeks combined their knowledge with that of the ancient Egyptians, this was the point at which souls were thought to incarnate into the earth plane from the fixed stars. So a really interesting connection there with this sort of starseed idea. But the Sabian symbol is sailors ready to hoist a new flag to replace an old one. So we get this real sense here of not only a connection to ships and to sailing, but also to the start of a new era, a new regime. We get the sense of changing of the guard, you know, so it could well, I mean, it fits quite well in the sense that this is a solar eclipse, and so we are starting a new 6-month cycle. So in a way, we are kind of turning a corner or starting a new cycle. But I think that this is also likely to pertain to leaders and to leadership. So it'll be interesting to see what happens on the world stage when it comes to, you know, this particular 6-month cycle, particularly since it leads up to the eclipses that are going to coincide with the November presidential elections in the US. So that will be quite interesting. But have a look at the keywords. I think you'll see that this is about shifting loyalties, it's about turning points, it's about giving up old ways, changing bad habits, and of course this I think ties in quite strongly with Venus retrograde, with Mercury retrograde, sort of getting very clear about, you know, what kind of beliefs, behaviors we want to carry into the next part of the year and what we want to leave behind, as well as getting clear about loyalties. And here there's going to be some overlaps with Canopus and with Cerise, I think, when we get to the starseed activation. So have a look and see whether any of these keywords ring any bells for you, and then I'm going to move on to Saros signatures. So this particular eclipse occurs as part of the 4 North Saros series, and this is as defined by Bernadette Brady in her book Predictive Astrology. So This particular eclipse, we did have a repeat of it in 1966, 1984, and 2002. So there may well be thematic overlaps between what happens now and then. So, you might want to kind of go back and have a look to see whether there's any, parallels. But overall, Bernadette Brady defines the series as being about inhibiting events or circumstances that somehow restrict or restrain or separate. So she feels that the Saturn signature is strong here, which can lead to personal or social blocks to progress. However, because Venus is making such a positive aspect to Saturn, and because we've got Mars also moving from Jupiter to a positive aspect to Saturn, I would say that that this may mitigate the energy of Saturn in this particular instance, and it's better to see any potential delays as a case of being fortunate delays. So rejection is God's protection, or fortunate delays. Now, in the original chart for this eclipse series, she warns that there's an unstable Uranian signature. That means that individuals sometimes overestimate their abilities, or are a little bit too overconfident about breaking the rules, basically. So she's kind of warning people not to kind of act or lash out or sort of be impulsive, because this may not kind of turn out in their favor. So that's kind of overview of the Saros signatures. Let's have a look at the chart itself. So now we come on to the astrological chart for this particular solstice solar eclipse. So as we can see, we've got the sun and the moon at about 0 degrees and 21 minutes of Cancer, so the first degree of Cancer. And this tells us that the sun has recently ingressed into the sign of Cancer in the Western tropical zodiac. Now, in Western astrology, the solstice point coincides with the ingress of the sun into the zodiac sign of Cancer, and that's because the tropical zodiac is actually based on the path of the sun, the ecliptic. It's a division of the ecliptic, so solar movements are really important in Western tropical astrology. So what I find interesting about this confluence of eclipse and solstice is that it's really asking us to think about the interplay of light and dark, because of course at the solstice, or at solstices in general, the sun is reaching its point of greatest light or greatest darkness. So it's in the northern hemisphere, it will be reaching its northerly declination, and therefore the longest day will have the longest day. But conversely, in the southern hemisphere at the same time, it will be the shortest day. And so there's always this sort of relationship between light and dark going on. We never really find one without the other. The same thing is true of the eclipses, which are part of the soli-lunar sort of interplay that we call the lunar cycle, but it's actually a soli-lunar cycle. And here we've got the moon moving across the face of the sun to create the corona, or the ring of fire, that we associate with solar eclipses. So again, there's this sort of idea of blocking out light, of kind of hiding and revealing, and I think again that's going to be important, particularly given the fact that we are within a week of this eclipse. We're heading for our second conjunction of Jupiter and Pluto, the first one being at the 444 gateway back in April, and in fact I think Saturn will be back at 0 degrees of Aquarius, so it's again drawing our attention to the equinoxes. So this is definitely linked to the solar cycle and to the seasons, and that particular time period may be significant for you. You may want to think back to that time. So the other thing to say is that the sun and the moon will be keying into a T-square between the nodes, which are now they've precessed into the signs of Sagittarius and Gemini, which is why the last lunar eclipse was in those signs, and of course Mars, in the mutable sign of Pisces. Now, I think what this is going to do is it's going to continue the themes that were begun at that lunar eclipse, particularly around Orion, or kind of warrior karma. I talked a little bit about the Orion gateway in sort of after that event, what it kind of activated, and I think that now we as a collective are starting to become more aware of this Martian theme, given how active Mars has been during the second half of June. And I think given that Mars will be moving between Jupiter and Pluto before and after this eclipse, kind of bookending it almost, tells us that this is an opportunity for us over the next 6 months or so to really work through the way that we assert ourselves, the way that we resolve conflict, the way that we in terms of activism, for example, that we just find less violent, less aggressive, less divisive ways of resolving conflict or asserting our needs or making a point, for example. I think it's also interesting that Mars is in the last degrees of Pisces, so it's in the last decade of Pisces, and will be moving to its reset almost when it moves into Aries around about the 28th of June. So this is a chance, this is Mars in its 12th house almost. So Mars is almost going through a kind of dark night of the soul to be reborn again in an equinox-like event when it ingresses into its natural sign and the beginning of the zodiac, as it were. So I think that's also really significant. Finally, Mercury will be making a conjunction to Cerise. You can see Mercury there at about 1424 of Cancer. It's retrograde, so this is about remembering, looking back, kind of hindsight, all those wonderful things. And if we think of Mercury as the intellect, the sort of the human intellect, but also that kind of go-between energy, the fact that it's connecting to Sirius, which is the brightest star in our galaxy and is associated with higher truths, with the higher realms, the higher dimensions, almost a kind of gateway to those higher dimensions, then I think that what we can say is that at this time we're probably going to be given access or have kind of light code activations or awakenings or remember things, gifts, for example, wisdom that we've already acquired in previous lives, or that we'll have access to through our guides and sort of helpers in the spiritual dimensions. So, and the galactic dimensions, of course. So that I think is going to be a key theme, but I'm going to get more into that in the starseed activations section, which is going to be next. Okay, so now that you've had a look at the chart, you're probably wondering where exactly the eclipse is going to fall in your chart. And just to say that I am going to be doing separate videos on this topic for each of the zodiac signs on my members section of my website. But for those of you that want a kind of quick cheat sheet, I've just done a table in which I've kind of outlined exactly when eclipse is likely to fall in for each zodiac sign, and then the key life areas that this is likely to activate. But as I say, check out my individual forecasts, because I'm going to concentrate there on not just the solar eclipse but also the lunar eclipse, and look at how both of them could play out for you individually per zodiac sign. So now we come on to the section on starseed activations and fixed star aspects. Now many of you may be asking, well, what are starseeds? This is not a term that is familiar to everybody, and of course you can do your research on this. There are a number of kind of sources of information about it, but the gist of it is that starseeds essentially remember their previous lives or incarnations on other planets and galaxies. So they probably had more recent lifetimes on those galaxies, and they have access to the gifts and the wisdom that comes from those particular lifetimes. But in essence, according to those people who have channeled or transmitted information from interplanetary or galactic sources, the human race itself is of starseed origin. The general belief is that we are seeded. The human race was seeded by the Syrians and the Lyrans. That's of course open to interpretation, but that is the kind of general belief. So it's interesting that at this solar and lunar eclipse, the Cerise in Cancer and Capricorn that we're having on the 21st of June and the 5th of July, that we're going to have alignments both with Sirius and with Lyra, some of the stars in Lyra. And we're also going to be having some of the planets in this galaxy, kind of aspecting some important fixed stars. So we're going to get onto those next and see what they're likely to kind of highlight for us. So for those who are new to the idea of star seeds, you're probably wondering what is a star seed. And in a nutshell, star seeds are people who are born but somehow either know or have direct access to information that allows them to know that they have had previous lifetimes on other planets and other galaxies, and often the way that they kind of get awakened is that they feel like an alien here on Earth. They just don't feel like they fit in, and the sense of alienation, which many astrologers would probably initially identify as being a Uranian signature, has now been sort of fleshed out by other astrologers as being a sign that they have starseed origins, that they are essentially they have more affiliation with other galaxies and other star races than they do with the human race, but they are here to help the planet to ascend at this time. So what are Sirian starseeds? What are the kind of characteristics of Sirian starseeds? So Sirians are believed to be one of the oldest group of star races, and one of the first to they're one of the kind of seed races that are thought to have been the origins of the human race. And some very often ways to sort of know that you're a starseed from Sirius is that you have a very vivid imagination, you're very creative, you might spend a lot of time daydreaming, you love music, you're very drawn to the arts, you're very expressive. You may also be highly intuitive and drawn to either mysticism or some form of divination, perhaps healing, like paganism, shamanism, that kind of thing. Very often Sirians starseeds are introverts, so they prefer to maintain a small group of close friends rather than be very extrovert. They also tend to be quite shy and hypervigilant, so for them trust and truth are very important. They value these very highly, and as a result they can be very slow to open up to people initially. They can seem as though they're not sort of taking any notice to, but they are avid people watchers and they are super vigilant. They're kind of taking everything in before they decide whether or not they want to kind of open up to you. So in a way this is quite scorpionic energy. In fact, it's quite it's sort of water-based to me. Some of them also have affinities with animals or nature, and maybe nature guardians, so that may be another way that you know that you are of Sirian origins. So yes, maybe something to think about, investigate further, see what happens during this time, because maybe you will get access to more information about your past lives during this period. So as part of the twin eclipses that are happening now in June and then in early July, we're going to have what I call the sort of Sirian Stargate alignment. Now, the Stargate alignment associated with Sirius tends to be called the Lion's Gate, and it tends to be seen as this sort of 888 portal. But I would argue that Sirius is actually more closely associated with the sign of Cancer, and that goes back to ancient Egypt, where Isis, who was the kind of mother goddess and became closely associated with the Greek goddess Sophia of wisdom, she was associated strongly with the star Sirius, which would rise heliacally with the sun at dawn around about this time at the solstice, which also coincided with the inundation of the Nile. And so what happened was that Greeks and kind of Greek astrologers were really taken with this idea, and so they started to sort of incorporate it into the astrological law. And what people like Porphyry and Plutarch tell us is that they believe that souls incarnate through the axis of Cancer and Capricorn. They see this as a kind of a gateway in which souls incarnate from this sort of fixed star, the fixed stars, down into the Earth dimension, the third dimension, and then at death, when they kind of leave their bodies, they go back up from Capricorn up, again to the stars. So it's possible that this sort of originated from the Egyptian worship of Sirius, and their kind of New Year's festivals that would happen, at the solstice. But what's really interesting is that Sirius, being the brightest star in the sky, has become associated with higher truth and wisdom. And at the solar eclipse, Mercury will be making a conjunction to to Cerise. So the way that I'm interpreting this is to see it as the human intellect merging with the higher dimensions. So it's almost a kind of theurgy, what the Greeks called theurgy, where there is this opening up and allowing the light from higher dimensions to kind of enter our bodies, our energetic bodies, fill us with light and light code activations, and then allow us to remember ancestral wisdom, for example, past life knowledge, messages from Syrian guides, as well as just sort of general, what people like to call downloads now, awakenings, sort of aha moments or eureka moments where we suddenly remember that we have certain skills, particularly in the fields of art and healing. So that's all kind of I think possible now. And it's worth saying that because Mercury is retrograde, this will be a remembering. It won't necessarily be new in the sense, it will probably be something that we will feel is familiar to us and that we'll kind of take to straight away. With that said as well, the dates may be important. So Mercury will be moving over this point between the 11th and the 23rd of June, and then when it turns direct, it will again move over these points towards the end of July. So we get two opportunities to to sort of have these downloads. And then at the lunar eclipse, both the Sun and the Moon and the Earth will align along the Cancer Capricorn axis, and this will allow for contacts with both Sirius and Lyra. So this I see as a kind of release of trauma or karma that has been accrued, negative karma from Sirian or Lyran lifetimes. So what can we expect with regards to the Sirian gateway? Well, being the brightest star in the sky, Cerise has long been associated with the Egyptian goddess Isis, the mother goddess, who would basically be seen to rise heliacally in the form of the star with the sun at sunrise at the time of the inundation, which happened around about the time of the summer solstice in Egypt, when the Nile would flood and all this wonderful fertile soil from higher up in the Egyptian highlands would sort of wash into the desert, and it would bring the desert to life. So it's very associated with abundance and with the idea of birth, of plenty, of fertility, of new life starting. So this is likely to be quite a positive time, actually, of heightened creativity, of a feeling of potential, of planting seeds for the beginning of a new time. And I think that really fits with the Sabian symbol, which seems to be about almost laying the foundations for the new earth that is coming, and that I think we will see more signs of as we get to the winter solstice and the Saturn-Pluto conjunction. So Mercury will be making a conjunction to Ceres at the solar eclipse, and as I said, I think this is going to activate, lead to more starseeds being awakened if they haven't already, particularly if they have affiliations to Sirius. I think that we're also going to see a lot of this goddess energy around. And then the other thing that's interesting about it is that if we think in terms of the Egyptian Isis, she was really considered to have a lot of functions, one of them being to revive Osiris, who was her counterpart. He was the sort of archetype that the pharaoh embodied on the earth, and he's really the fertility god who kind of dies and then is reborn, the kind of the male corn god, if you like. So her role was to revive him after he was killed and cut into many pieces by his jealous brother Set, and so she helped to put him back together and to revive him. That's kind of one of her roles. And I think that given that we've got these contacts to Mars at the solar eclipse, it's possible that part of the Syrian role here is to revive the masculine, to kind of help the divine masculine to shed its layers of toxicity and kind of come more into alignment with masculinity in its pure form. Of course, the other thing that Isis did was she nurtured future leaders, because she was, of course, the original Madonna. You often see statues of her suckling her son Horus, who is the crown prince. And so in a way we could say that this is the job of mothers everywhere, to kind of nurture, to be kingmakers basically. This is the power behind the throne. This is the important part of raising, sons and males to be to fulfill their potential as men. So that's another way that you can look at this energy. And then, of course, in the more sort of Greek sense, Cerise is part of Canis Major, which is the dog star. So to Westerners, has associations naturally with loyalty and with friendship, and it's possible that during this time you may find greater alignments with your soul tribe if you haven't already. So those are some of the sort of key things to look out for during this Cerise alignment. And then the other important star alignment that's happening at this eclipse is the conjunction of Mercury to the fixed star Canopus. Now, Canopus is thought of kind of in the main as being a part of the constellation of the ship, or the Argo in Greek. But it's possible that it also has overlaps with Egyptian lore, particularly with the sunbark, or what was known as the boat of a million years, which was thought to carry the sun god ray around the sky and then through the underworld at night. Through the hours of the night, and this was how they explained the diurnal cycle of the sun. Now, what's important here is that there's a focus on the helmsman. So if you look at this graphic, you can see that although we've got the sun god in his old man form of Atum, the sort of ram-headed god, in the front of the boat is what looks like a sort of like a helmsman, or a kind of a navigator, basically, and then you've got the guy at the back who's supposedly responsible for the rudder. So this is the focus of this star is about the helmsman. This is the person who guides and steers this ship, the pathfinder or the way shower, the person who navigates through difficult waters. And it's interesting because in astrology, certainly during the time of when Western astrology was developing in Egypt, one of the ways, or one of the names that was given to the ascendant was helmsman or helm. So there is this kind of natural idea of associated between the ascendant and the idea of the helmsman. So it's quite interesting that all this kind of comes together with the Egyptian stuff. Now, what's also fascinating, and what also potentially links Canopus to Egypt, is the name of the star itself. Some people think that it is a Greek name associated with Greek mythology, but other people think that it was derived from the Egyptian Coptic word Kah-Hinub, which means golden earth. And of course, at the moment, that's got major sort of resonances with this idea of the new earth, of this golden age that the age of Aquarius is supposed to usher in, etc., etc. So it's really interesting that we got these kind of overlaps with this particular star. And what's interesting is the kind of naval, or the seafaring, the maritime links to ships and barks and navigation, which we also had with the Sabine symbol. And so it's really interesting. The other interesting thing, this is according to Bernadette Brady, is that Canopus was also associated with anchors, in the sense that it was once the name given to the weight at the end of a plumb line, which was used to define the polar axis or to find the pole stars, as well as to sort of measure out the foundations of pyramids and so on. So that's really interesting. Again, another kind of seafaring metaphor. So I think that we need to sort of bear this in mind and see what kind of comes out in terms of synchronistic events that either guide us and give us clear signs of the direction that we need to follow from here on in, because of course a lot of people have been thrown off course, or feel like they've been thrown off course as a result of this lockdown period, this pandemic. So it'll be interesting to see what kind of happens when Mercury retrograde makes this conjunction. It may well be that you realize that you had kind of picked up the trail early on in your life, and then you'd kind of gone off track, perhaps got a little bit distracted, and now are kind of shown back onto your path. So I think this is going to help a lot of people get in touch or realign with their soul purpose, and also potentially get in touch with their guardian angel or spirit guide, because again, the ancient astrologers, with their idea of the helmsman, they also believed that the ascendant ascendant could tell you something about your primary spirit guide or sort of guardian angel. So the helmsman may also be your kind of this higher self, this connection to your personal angel. So, you know, a couple of things to think about over the next few months as we move through this energy. So that's it for this particular overview forecast. As I say, I am going to be doing individual video horoscopes as well as a written forecast for those members who prefer written summaries. So do go to the membership area and check those out. All the links will be made available there. So I'm wishing you all the best for the upcoming solstice. May the force be with you, and I'll see you on the other side.